So much more happened in those 28 days. And, I'll probably never remember most of it. It's a crazy, crazy time in my life. But it seemed to go really fast and really slow at the same time. A few days after the infection was mostly cleared up, they asked me if I wanted to go home. I almost didn't want to go home. I had nearly died a few days before. Are you guys crazy? You're sending me home? They said, yeah, you can't live in the hospital. You can go home. We can put you on IV antibiotics at your house. Your wife can give them to you. It'll be fine. Okay. So they put in a PICC line in my arm for her to be able to give me antibiotics and for them to do the rest of the chemo on, when I had to come back. And they did a bone marrow biopsy before I left. Very uncomfortable again. No Valium this time, nothing. Just a little lidocaine in the hip, and then a giant needle in the hip. It hurts. They basically have to go in there and break your bones and pull out bone fragments. And then they test those bone fragments to see if you're in remission or not. We went down to the pharmacy in the hospital, and they gave Shannon several bags of IV antibiotics to give to me at the house. She's not a nurse. She doesn't do that. But she would be responsible for giving me IV antibiotics 2 or 3 times a day for the next week. She would be responsible for cleaning my PICC line, changing my bandages, taking care of it. This girl with no medical experience would be in charge of this. But it was okay because we were going home. I didn't die in the hospital. I was okay. And that drive was wonderful. I felt so free. I felt so alive. I cannot describe it. We knew we would have to be back in a few days to visit with the doctor and see, where we were at remission-wise. But man, I would get to go home. I saw my kids. We played. Oh, it was great. Best part was I saw my dad. I didn't know if he was gonna make it. I hadn't really talked to him in over a month because he was out of it. He had made it. He was out of that hospital, and he was okay too. They thought he was going to die. He didn't die. We were both just so grateful to see each other. It's a moment in time I will never forget. A couple days later, Shannon and I drove back to Little Rock. My sister-in-law met us there so she could listen too. And got some bad news. The chemo had not killed the leukemia. There was still like 2% left in me. Usually with ALL, the prognosis is much better if you kick the leukemia in the first month and then you go on maintenance chemo and you can usually be okay. But that hadn't happened. So I had to go back in the hospital for another round, which that round was planned anyway, but it stung knowing that I still had this leukemia after all that I had been through, after nearly dying of a stupid infection. I can't explain to you the hopelessness. And yet there was still hope for me. Not given to me by the doctor. He said that this is bad and you have to have a stem cell transplant. I have no idea what that is. I knew, I'd heard about stem cells, heard there's some sort of miracle thing, whatever. Not that kind of stem cells. A stem cell transplant. They would find me a match, and then after I went through 8 rounds of chemo, they would do full body radiation on me and then pump somebody else's stem cells into me and hope that I come back to life. And then if you do all that, there's a 50% chance that this disease will never come back. 50%. But I knew we had to do it. There was no choice. So he said, we want to send you to St. Louis. because we don't do those here. They do stem cell transplants, but not the kind that I needed. So we go through the next round of chemo, and it's terrible, but not quite as bad as the first time because we knew what we were getting into, and the chemo was a little different this time. They alternate the kinds of chemo that they give you. And then they sent me home on 200 milligrams of prednisone twice a day, and methotrexate, and another pill that the name is failing me. The methotrexate I took once a week, 18 pills at a time. The prednisone, my goodness, messed me up. Me and prednisone don't get along. So while I was recovering at home from that second round of chemo, my white count was 0, and I got some sort of infection, and I had to go back in the hospital, but it was the local hospital. I was running a fever. We didn't know what was going on. So they put me on IV antibiotics. They did more blood transfusions. While I was in the hospital for that first 28 days, I probably had 10 to 12 blood transfusions because my blood was so bad and just wasn't working, and they were depleting it, and you have to have blood to live. And so at the local hospital here, they gave me another blood transfusion because I was under the levels, and they had to bring my blood back up before they could treat me for the infection. Here's the deal. I had to have irradiated blood, but they didn't have irradiated blood, so they didn't give me irradiated blood. I had a reaction in about 5 to 10 minutes of that blood pump starting on me. My body was violently shaking. I remember looking at my wife and telling her goodbye with my eyes. After all I had been through in Little Rock, I was gonna die in Texarkana because they didn't give me the right kind of blood. Thankfully, they got it under control, and they knew, yeah, we gotta do irradiated blood. They tried to keep me in the hospital for several days there. I did not want to be in the hospital. I begged and pleaded the infectious disease doctor to get me out of there. I said, I have to go to St. Louis. There's hope in St. Louis. I have to meet with this doctor. So finally they let me out like a day or two before our trip, and we head to St. Louis. And in St. Louis, the doctor told me, I don't think you need a stem cell transplant. He said, I think that, you just finished off your second round of chemo, and we need to do a bone marrow biopsy on you. And if you're clear this time, I don't think we need to do a stem cell transplant. There's so many risks. Lots of people don't even make it, and even if you do make it, it's a 50% chance that you would live anyway, and that the cancer won't come back. That was good news for me. I didn't want to have the stem cell transplant by that time. It was the first news of hope that I had had. Maybe we won't have to do this.